All right, today we started working on solving equations with fractions and decimals, and I taught you guys fraction and decimal busters. So let's go ahead and get started by doing some reviewing. So let's review what LCM means, which is the least common multiple. Now, if you recall in 7th grade, that the least common multiple is really the smallest multiple that numbers have in common. So for example, what is the least common multiple of 4, 5, and 2? Well, you would list all the multiples of 4, which are 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, and 24, and the multiples of 5, which are 5, 10, etc., and then the multiples of 2. And then you would see what is the smallest one that they have in common. Well, if you look, they each have a multiple of 20 in common, and I didn't write it in because I ran out of space. So the least common multiple is 20. Here's another example. What is the least common multiple of 3, 2, and 7? Now, some of you guys can just quickly do it in your head. So do what the multiples. I like to take the biggest number, which in this case is 7, and write down 7 and see if any of those, make sure that those are divided by 2 and 3. Is 7 divided by 2? It will be divided by 2? No. By 3? No. How about 14? Can you divide 14 by 2 and 3? No. 21? No. How about 28? Well, no. How about 35? Can you divide 35 by 2 and 3? No. How about 42? And the correct answer will be 42 because 42 is a multiple of 7 that you can divide by 2 and 3. And that's going to help us when it comes to using fraction busters. So let's look at example number 1. Here we have an equation. And so first thing you do is you write down your steps, which is friends don't come into algebra mad chump. And the first step is fraction busters. We have fractions, and so we got to look at the denominators. We got a denominator of 10, a denominator of 2, and a denominator of 5. So we got to figure out the least common multiple between 10, 2, and 5. So if you want to, you can write all the multiples of 10 and all the multiples of 2 and 5, and you would come up with the least common multiple of 10 because 10 is divisible by 2 and 5. And so we're going to take that 10 and we're going to multiply both sides of our equation by 10 using the distributive property. So let's do the other side, and so we multiply 10 by both sides of our equation, and so we're going to distribute the 10. Here we got 10 times 7 tenths n. I told you guys to do your work on the side. When you multiply 10 times 7 tenths, you see that the 10s cancel out, and so you end up with 7n. Then you got to distribute the 10 to the 3 halves. Well, remember that the 2 goes in the 10 5 times, and so 5 times 3 is 15, but you might want to do your work on the side because this seems really confusing. Let's distribute the 10 and multiply 10 times 3/5 n. Well, the 10 is canceled out by the 5 2 times, and so you end up with 6n. All right, so now we distribute the 10 to the positive 2, and we end up with positive 20. And now our fractions are gone using the fraction busters, which I think kids like to use instead of using, adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing fractions. Then we go to the next step, distributive property. We don't have that. Collect like terms on each side. Nope, we can't do that because we got a variable term and a constant term on both sides, and you can't add things that are not alike. Now let's isolate the variable term. We want to undo positive 6n. How do we undo positive 6n? By subtracting 6n from both sides. And so we end up with 20. And on the other side, we end up with 1n plus 15. Now we go to the next step, which is undo adding and subtracting of a constant term. We want to undo positive 15. How do you undo positive 15? By subtracting 15. And negative 15 plus 15 cancels out. You end up with 0. So you end up with 1n equals 5, which is the same thing as n equals 5. And so our solution is 5. I forgot to cross out the steps. So we would check our solution now, but for the sake of time, let's go ahead and move on to the next problem. Here we have an equation and we have fractions. And our fractions our denominators are 7. And so we have to figure out, write down our steps. Friends don't come in algebra matchup. And the least common multiple of 7 is going to be 7. So we're going to multiply 7 on everything on the left half by 7, and everything on the right hand side by 7. So you use the distributive property. 7 times 1/7, well, the 7's cancel out. You end up with 1, and you end up with k, specifically 1k. Then you multiply 7 times -6, which ends up being -42. Now we go on to the other side. We have 7 times 3/7, well, the 7's cancel out, and you end up with 3k. And then 7 times 4 is positive 28. No distributive property, no collect like terms. Isolate the variable terms. Well, the smallest is positive 1k. How do we undo positive 1k? By subtracting k from both sides, and we end up with -42 on the left-hand side because 1k minus 1k is 0. And on the right-hand side, 3k minus 1k is 2k, and then you end up with 2k plus 28. Now we go to A, undo adding and subtracting of our constant. Well, we want to undo the constant next to the variable term, which in this case is positive 28. How do you undo positive 28? You subtract 28 from both sides. All right, positive 28 minus 28, we end up with 2k equals -70. And then we undo multiplying or dividing of a variable term. K is being multiplied by 2. How do we undo multiplying by 2? We divide both sides by 2. And so you end up with K equals -35. Now, I also taught you guys today about decimal busters. First time I've ever done this. First thing you do is you write your steps. Friends don't come in algebra matchup. And the F stands for fraction busters or decimal busters. And if you look at your decimals, you got tenths, you got hundredths, and you got tenths. So you need to find the least common multiple between 10 and 100, which in this case is going to be 100. And it's the same thing. You need to multiply both sides by the least common multiple, which in this case is 100. And so multiply 100, distribute the 100 on both sides. All right, 100 times 2/10. Well, I taught you guys today when you multiply by 100, you move the decimal over 2 places to the right. So if you multiply, if you move the decimal over 2 places to the right from 2/10, you end up with 20n. Now you multiply 100 times 75 hundredths. If you multiply the decimal over 2 places to the right on 75 hundredths, you end up with 75, and in this case it's positive. On the other side, you end up with 100 times 5/10 n. Because we're multiplying by 100, you're going to move the decimal over to the right 2 places. And if you move it over 1 place, you end up with 5. And if you move it over another place, you end up with 50. And so the 100 times 5/10 n is 50n. So now we're going to no distributive property, no collect like terms. We have to isolate the variable term. Let's get rid of the smallest one, which in this case is 20n, by subtracting 20n from both sides. 20n minus 20n equals 0. So you end up with positive 75 on the left, and 50n minus 20n equals 30n. Then we go to the next step, A, undo adding and subtracting of a constant. Well, if you look on the variable term side, there is no constant, so we go on to the next step, which is undoing multiplying or dividing of a variable term. N is being multiplied by 30. How do you undo multiplying by 30? You divide both sides by 30. 30n divided by 30 ends up being positive 1n. And 75 divided by 30, well, you go to the side and you divide. 30 goes into 75 2 times. Multiply 2 times 30 is 60. You subtract, you end up with 15. Add your decimal, add your placeholder, and you end up with 2 5/10. Now remember, because this problem has decimals in the original, we want to write our solution as decimals instead of a fraction. So we end up with n equals 2 5/10 n. So I hope this helps you guys with the fraction and decimal busters. We're going to continue working on this the next few days. Thank you for watching. If you guys have any questions or comments, please come see me. Thank you.